The last time we left off, we discovered that Coroner Katy Skerrett's report of Thomas Kingston's death, allegedly by firearm, remarkably included no details about ballistics. So we are being given a narrative of this man's death, where he presumably took his own life with a firearm, but there is no information about the trajectory of a bullet entering his body, which would determine conclusively if this was really a suicide or not. And we have no accounts of any witnesses, not Thomas's parents or anyone else, having heard the report of a gunshot, and no documented evidence of gunpowder residue on his hands or clothing. At Thomas's funeral, William appeared front and center. In fact, he was leading the procession. Now, I thought that William's appearance seemed a bit like an overcompensation. Here we have a minor royal adjacent figure that, let's face it, most of us knew nothing about before he died, and yet here is William leading the procession at his funeral just days after the press all but implicated him in Thomas's death. The press curiously referred to William and Thomas as close childhood friends. And so I read that and I thought, close friends. Well, if they were such close friends, why don't we have any documented photographic evidence of them together? Now, we know for a fact that William and Thomas attended the same events at the same time. There was the Royal Ascot, Trooping the Color, the Beaufort Polo Club, which Thomas frequented, and yet these close friends never took a single photograph together. Now, it is well documented that Thomas and Kate's sister Pippa were an item at one point. There are numerous images of them all over the internet snookering it up. And so logically I thought, well, Kate was very close to her sister. I'm not so sure if they're still close. Maybe Thomas's death has something to do with that. Anyway, if Pippa and Thomas were very publicly an item, that would mean that Kate would have known Thomas very well. In fact, according to the press, while he dated Pippa, Thomas had many dinners at the Middleton residence, and yet we have no photographs of Thomas and Kate. And for those of you listening to this who are saying, well, so what? He was dating Pippa, not Kate. Fine, but let's take a trip back to memory lane. In the early days of William and Kate's courtship, Pippa was very much an appendage in their relationship. There are these famous photographs of the young lovebirds frolicking on a yacht. Gee, they sure do love their yachts, don't they? Here's Miss Yacht Girl and Mr. Yacht Boy basking in the raging hormones of their youth with Pippa right alongside them. William was dating Kate at the time, yet he seemed to be rather preoccupied with Kate's sister. Here he is grabbing her waist in one shot. Yes, that's Pippa, not Kate. And here we have another shot of William swimming around the boat in order to take a peek of Pippa removing her top. This is William. Not only is he a creep, but he is a very possessive creep. Being the heir, he feels entitled to have any woman he wants, even if it's his girlfriend's sister. And a man like this does not take too kindly to competition. Now, by all accounts, Thomas was brilliant. He was successful at a young age. He was fearless, having survived bombings in Iraq, and was even a hostage negotiator. There's a suspicion that he also may have been a member of British intelligence. He dated women in the same social circles as William. There was Natalie Hicks Lubbock, once on William's list of potential brides during his on-again, off-again relationship with Kate. And knowing what we now know about William, who thinks of himself as a playboy, a real-life James Bond, or a wannabe global statesman, it must have been pretty chafing to see this non-royal being the embodiment of everything he wishes himself to be. William may have been harboring feelings of inadequacy born from his jealousy of Thomas. All you have to do is look at how he treats his brother, and you will understand why William's only friends are a couple of drunks who suck up to him for paid positions. William has no real friends, and he lacks any real purpose. And seeing a man like Thomas Kingston easily navigate his way through royal circles would have caught his ire. Here's Thomas with Camilla. Here's Thomas on the vaunted balcony, the royals' version of Survivor, where instead of getting kicked off an island, you get kicked off a balcony. The balcony is their way of showing the world who's fallen and who is deemed worthy. And Thomas was deemed worthy, but yet not a single photograph of him exists with either William or Kate. Now, is it possible that these photos existed on the internet prior to Thomas entering the public discourse? We may never know, but what we do know for a fact is that the royal family has been known to scrub the internet of images or stories they don't want anyone talking about. We found out last year when Vulture wrote a piece about the disappearing Rose Hanbury timeline. All right, moving on. I want to talk about something that is not documented in the press, but was something going around the rumor mill, and that is that Thomas may have attended a party at Highgrove a day before his death, which happens to be just a few miles down the road from his parents' home in the Cotswolds. Highgrove now belongs to William as part of his inheritance of the Duchy of Cornwall, and where Charles is now actually obliged to pay him rent. But something else strange happened at Highgrove. About a little more than a week after Thomas's death, Captain Ian Farquhar, the caretaker at Highgrove, was found dead. The official cause? Death by misadventure. Now, folks, you might be wondering what death by misadventure means. Well, in this case, it's when someone is found pinned between a wall and a bed. I'm sorry, what? Ian Farquhar died of asphyxiation after being inescapably wedged between a wall and his bed. So my question is, was someone pushing the bed towards him? Because that sounds like a rather unusual way to die, even if you're drunk. So now we have Thomas possibly having attended a party at Highgrove, where the caretaker ends up dead 9 days after Thomas's death. Did he witness something? In the moments before his death, the initial reports state that Thomas was having lunch with his parents. His dad left to go for a walk, and at some point they couldn't find Thomas. After searching for about 30 minutes, his dad went looking for him and found either a locked-out building or a locked-out building. I don't know the difference, but it's kind of an odd semantic detail. Anyway, he breaks down the door to find Thomas is dead. Okay, that was the original version. The latest version changes, however. This version says they all fell asleep and that when they woke up, Thomas was gone. According to reports, his mom said that Thomas left to retrieve something from his car that he wanted to store inside the house. What that was, we don't know. Now, I always suspected that being in the world of finance, Thomas may have discovered something that might compromise key members of the royal family. Could he have been hiding some incriminating document at his parents' home for safekeeping before being ambushed? Next, we have the stickiest detail in this story, which is the basis for the narrative given to the public, the antidepressant angle. So Thomas was allegedly taking antidepressants, and that somehow this had a negative effect on him, triggering him to want to harm himself. This is the story they came up with 9 months after his death. In fact, Coroner Katy Skerrett's report talks quite a lot about antidepressants. But here's something that might surprise you. In Thomas's only toxicology report, because he was cremated right afterwards, there were no traces of antidepressants found in his body. All that was found was caffeine and zopiclone, a sleep medication. That's it. So now you might be asking yourselves, if there were no traces of antidepressants found in his toxicology report, why would Katy Skerrett mention antidepressants in her coroner's report, but no ballistics? Where is the coroner getting this information? Enter Dr. Nicky Naunton Morgan, Apothecary to King Charles and Queen Camilla. The only piece of evidence we have that Thomas Kingston was taking antidepressants is not from his toxicology report, which found he had only caffeine and a sleep aid, but from Charles and Camilla's pharmacist, who, according to Coroner Katy Skerrett, had been the one who prescribed Thomas the medication. Is it starting to dawn on you yet, folks? And here's the thing about Nicky Naunton Morgan. She's not even a psychiatrist. When you look at her website, it states that she's a dermatologist who was only very recently appointed to be apothecary to Charles and Camilla. This is who they are telling us prescribed powerful antidepressant drugs to Thomas Kingston, and that ultimately caused his death. A dermatologist. Could Thomas not afford to see a real psychiatrist? Was she having a fire sale? It makes no sense. And so now, if there are no traces of antidepressants in this system, how do you then go on to list it as a cause of death? See, now, according to Katy Skerrett, the reason you can't find any antidepressants in his system is because Thomas had conveniently stopped taking the medication that was prescribed by a doctor who also happens to not be a psychiatrist, but a dermatologist who was recently appointed to be Charles and Camilla's pharmacist. Got that, folks? And we're supposed to just take their word for it. Now, at the very first inquest conducted on March 1st, there were no members of Thomas's family present, not his wife and not his parents. Instead, at this very first inquest, the only people in attendance were Coroner Katy Skerrett, members of the press, and an unnamed member of the royal household, who is alluded to be none other than Nicky Naunton Morgan. Wouldn't you know it? The same royal apothecary / dermatologist to Charles and Camilla, who we are now being told is the one who prescribed Thomas the antidepressants that weren't found in his body. Okay, then. Now, why would there be a member of the royal household present for a non-royal member of the family at the inquest where the body was to be identified instead of Thomas's wife or parents? This reeks of a massive cover-up. In the final inquest, Skerrett included testimony from a Dr. David Healy, an expert witness who testified about the dangers of SSRI medication. Except Dr. David Healy had never even seen Thomas as a patient. His expertise was simply used to bolster the narrative that antidepressants played a role in his death, even though, I reiterate, there were no antidepressants found in Thomas's system. So here we have a whole host of actors willing to play along and give testimony in order to craft a narrative for public consumption. I mentioned in my previous video on this topic that a full year after his tragic death, the press came up with yet another angle to the story. They claimed that this man, who was a Schroders analyst in his 20s, a hostage negotiator in his 30s, a self-made millionaire who was well-liked by everyone who knew him, Well, it turns out that he was a bungling businessman who was popping antidepressants. They want us to believe that for a mere 8 million pounds of debt, Thomas Kingston, a man who had extensive financial experience, he somehow saw no way out. Folks, it is incredibly common for an investment firm to have debt. It's called leverage, and it is a core structural component of how investment firms maximize their returns. For example, BlackRock Inc., the world's largest asset management firm, has over $15 billion in debt. I suppose they too must all be suicidal. But this is what the royals do. They rely on the public's layman's knowledge of the world of investment in order to paint the picture they want you to see. Thomas's firm having debt would have been nothing out of the ordinary. But couple it with the antidepressant story, and it is enough to close the case in people's minds. Someone in the comments even said that Thomas may have had a gambling problem. Next, we're going to hear he was moonlighting as a Chippendales dancer. Okay, so now that brings me to the next point. And again, someone in the comments brought this up. Why is it that everyone who knew Thomas says exactly the same thing? That he did not appear to be in any state of distress. Everyone who saw Thomas in the days leading up to his death, including his wife and his parents, all say the same thing, that he was happy, laughing, and did not appear to be depressed in any way. And I know some people are going to say, well, he could have been hiding it. Look, folks, this is what I know about depressed people. Depressed people don't want to go out. They don't want to see anyone. And as far as him taking antidepressants, there can be no exhumation of his body to conduct further analyses because he was promptly cremated right after his funeral. And we have to rely on this shady-ass coroner who somehow found a doctor to testify about the dangers of antidepressants who had never even had Thomas as a patient. And conveniently, Charles and Camilla's pharmacist/dermatologist gallantly stepping forward to state that she had prescribed the antidepressants that weren't found in his system. Alrighty then. Now, what makes this case so relevant is that it happened in the backdrop of Kate Middleton's bizarre disappearance in the first half of 2024. Leading up to her disappearance, there were signs that Kate was going through something. She and William appeared at the Royal Variety Christmas show that year, where she appeared glassy-eyed and almost fearful. You might also recall that this was when magician Darren Brown wrote a cryptic tweet that surfaced months later, wherein he stated that Kate had slipped him a note saying simply, "Help." This was later debunked as a reference to an old Dame Edna joke. However, Darren had nothing to say on the matter. Weeks later, after the Sandringham Christmas walk, a convoy of vehicles would be seen heading out to the King Edward VIII Hospital. And you know the rest of the story. Kate wouldn't be seen again for almost 6 months. And during that time, William began displaying rather suspicious and bizarre behavior. There were dubious sightings of Kate that all led to nowhere. Now, I don't know this for certain, folks, but I think it's pretty safe to say that during the period leading up to Thomas's death, William had no access to Kate or the children. Then, sometime after Thomas died, William pops up at a football match with a very shaken-looking Prince George. Given Thomas's experience as a hostage negotiator, could Thomas have been navigating an exit for Kate and the children? Sarah Ferguson recently said that no woman leaves the firm with her head intact. And we all know what happened to Diana. Could Kate have been attempting to escape the firm after one final blowout with William? For years, there were numerous reports in the press about their turbulent marriage, including one even stating that they frequently throw things at each other. Now, there's no point denying the rumors that William may have allegedly physically harmed Kate to the point where she may have needed hospitalization. And I'll stress that this is a rumor, and I have no evidence that affirms that William did something to Kate. But what we do know is his bizarre behavior during those months when Kate was out of the public eye. There was the investiture ceremony where he was seen swinging back and forth and looking hungover. He was so nervous that he even dropped one of the recipients' awards. Then there were the countless articles making excuses about why she couldn't be seen. Even the army had to retract a statement announcing that she would appear later that year. There were the dodgy Photoshop pictures, including the now infamous Mother's Day photo that cemented the phrase for posterity that Kensington Palace is no longer a trusted source, and where the entire royal family became the laughingstock of the entire world, infuriating Charles, who waited decades to become king, only to have his reign overshadowed by the bungling antics of his heir. What was clear is that there was a time that Kate was not coming back. Either she didn't want to come back or she wasn't able to. Many of you might remember the bombshell Concha Calleja report that said that Kate was in a coma, a report that to this day she has never retracted. Eventually, there was Kate's bizarre re-entry into society with her many changing faces, including the ones that occasionally slip past the airbrushing in which she appears to bear the scars of an enormous gash above her eye. Or was she simply fed up with William's philandering? The timeline of her disappearance coincides with a report some months before where she gave William an ultimatum: leave Rose or else. But William had heard this ultimatum many times before, and he treated this one like he did all the others. Because Kate has no power in this family, William dominates her, as he does everyone else, under royal family control. And when that control is lost, William goes ballistic. Less than a week after Thomas's death, William emerged appearing to have been in a physical struggle. Now, there's no evidence that we know of that places William with Thomas, other than the press admission that his absence at the Constantine Memorial was unrelated to Thomas's death, and that the police were not investigating the matter any further. And this suggests that the press may have some information that places William with Thomas around the time of his death. Could William have found out that Thomas may have been helping Kate escape and perhaps flew into a jealous rage? Or did Thomas find out something else, something that needed to be safeguarded at his parents' home? Perhaps something related to the royal family's long history of dodgy finances. Some of you might recall a few weeks ago, William confessed that he often slips into pubs wearing disguises. And I'm going to talk about that more in the next video. But there is another disguise he admits to wearing, and that is his motorcycle helmet when he's off on one of his adventures, which apparently happens more than we think. In a 2017 article from Hello magazine, William once said about his motorcycle helmet, "It does help being anonymous." Could William have ridden incognito over to Thomas's parents' home in the Cotswolds, just a few miles from Highgrove, and where the groundskeeper died under mysterious circumstances just days after Kingston's death? Were words exchanged followed by a struggle? And did this result in one of the many royal cover-ups in the long history of royal cover-ups? Only time will tell. Stay tuned.